My name is David Turner, and I have worn uniforms, fought wars, and seen violence that most men never dream of, but nothing I went through overseas ever prepared me for the nightmare that unfolded in Morinton, the small town where my wife Angela and I tried to build a quiet life. Over the last 2 months, 7 dogs were killed, all of them pets, all of them belonging to different families, and every single one discovered in a condition that left no doubt that it was deliberate. Their throats were cut, their bodies left in their yards or even in their living rooms, and some of them had their collars placed carefully, almost reverently, back where they used to sleep. I run a dog care center here in town, and Angela is a veterinarian, so we knew all of these animals. We had treated them, boarded them, played with them, and comforted their owners, which made the killings feel like attacks on us as well. Morinton is not the kind of place where you expect fear to creep in, but soon people were locking gates, keeping their kids close, and whispering theories in the diner while they drank coffee they didn't finish. The sheriff said coyotes, or maybe a drifter passing through, but I had seen blood before and I knew the difference between an animal's frenzy and a human's hand. Angela said the cuts were precise, surgical even, and that frightened her more than anything, because it meant this was not a random maniac, it was someone who knew anatomy, someone methodical. The night after the 7th killing, Angela sat at the kitchen table with her head in her hands and told me she couldn't stand by anymore. The law wasn't helping, the town was paralyzed, and the dogs in our care center could be next. We made the decision without really saying it out loud. We would investigate ourselves, just the 2 of us. We started by visiting the grieving families, pretending it was only neighborly concern. I asked about locks, about fences, about what they heard at night. Angela, ever the professional, asked to see the bodies again when possible. That was when she noticed details no one else had mentioned. A retriever had a clean puncture wound beneath the throat slash, and a dachshund had a thin, deliberate incision along its belly. These weren't just killings, these were examinations. We stayed at the center one night, with coffee and my old service pistol laid on the desk. Around 2 in the morning, the dogs began to whimper, not bark, not growl, just that low, fearful sound that crawls into your gut. I walked through the kennels with a flashlight, and every pair of eyes reflected back wide and uneasy, bodies pressed low as if they were all sensing something that hadn't revealed itself yet. The air smelled metallic, faintly like blood, and when I reached the back fence, I saw a narrow flashlight beam weaving through the trees. I shouted, but the light never wavered, just moved deeper into the woods until it was gone. In the morning I found tracks by the fence, boot prints leading in and back out. We followed them together later that day, and they wound along the riverbank until they climbed the hill behind the old abandoned slaughterhouse. Morinton Meats had been shut down years ago, but the rusted hooks still hung from the rafters, and the smell of iron seemed burned into the walls forever. Inside, on the stained concrete floor, Angela froze and pointed with a trembling hand. There, arranged in a careful circle, were 7 collars. Each one belonged to a dog we knew: Buddy, Max, Coco, Duke, Bella, Scout, Lucky. In the center of the circle lay a leather notebook. I picked it up and opened it, and my stomach turned to stone. Page after page contained meticulous sketches of dogs, each numbered, with arrows pointing to organs and notes in cramped handwriting. The words were cold, clinical, 7th subject, improved response, no vocalization, extraction cleaner. Angela covered her mouth and gagged, tears springing into her eyes. I couldn't speak, because the truth was too plain. Someone in our town was not killing animals out of rage or impulse. They were studying them, perfecting something. And then we heard the footsteps above us, slow and deliberate. Angela pressed against me, whispering my name, as I raised the pistol and waited. The figure appeared in the stairwell, and when the beam of my flashlight landed on his face, my heart stopped. It was Sheriff Dalton. For a split second, his eyes hardened into something cold, not the lazy friendliness we all knew. But then he smiled like nothing was wrong, and asked us what the hell we thought we were doing. My finger tightened on the trigger, as the realization hit me like a mortar round. Dalton hadn't failed to catch the killer. Dalton was the killer. He had dismissed every lead, hurried every family out of their grief, and kept the town quiet because it was his own secret to keep. I lifted the notebook for him to see, and in that moment, his mask dropped completely. He stepped closer, calm and unafraid, and said in a voice so steady it made my skin crawl, "You don't understand. They were just animals, trials. Do you know what I went through overseas? Do you know what they made me do? Cutting those dogs gives order to it. It makes sense. You should understand, soldier. You more than anyone. His words burrowed into me because part of me did understand the madness of trying to impose order on chaos, of finding ritual in blood, but I also knew that this was not survival, it was sickness. He stepped closer, and I fired, the shot sparking off concrete, and then he was on me, stronger than I expected, slamming me into the circle of collars. We grappled for the gun, and I smelled his sweat, his breath, heard the ragged rasp of his laugh. Angela screamed and grabbed a rusted meat hook from the wall, swinging it hard. It tore across his arm, blood spraying, but still he didn't go down. His other hand locked around my throat and squeezed. His eyes burned into mine as he hissed, 7 was practice, 8 will be perfection. My vision blurred, blackness creeping in, but I forced the pistol between us and fired point blank. The blast thundered in the hollow slaughterhouse and Dalton's body jerked, then collapsed heavily across me, his eyes wide in shock as the blood spread beneath him. We sat there for a long time, the silence only broken by our gasps for air, until dawn light finally crept through broken windows. The collars lay scattered across the blood-stained floor, silent witnesses to the nightmare. We carried the notebook straight to the state police, who descended on Morinton like a storm. They found Dalton's hidden journals, surgical instruments, files on the dogs, and evidence that proved without doubt that the man meant to protect the town had been the one dissecting its pets. Families buried empty collars. The town tried to heal, but I could see it in their eyes when I passed them on the street. The disbelief that evil had worn a badge among us, had smiled at us, had pretended to protect us. Angela still wakes at night, shaking, and I hold her until her breathing steadies. But I cannot forget Dalton's last words, because when they catalogued the notebook, the investigators found a page we had missed. It was unfinished, the handwriting jagged, but clear enough. A list of breeds, and at the bottom, the 8th entry circled in red, German Shepherd. Next to it was a date, the very night after we had confronted him. And the sick truth is that Angela and I own a German Shepherd named Bruno, who had been asleep in the kennel at our center the night we stumbled into the slaughterhouse. Dalton's 8th subject, his attempt at perfection, was supposed to be our dog. And I wonder, in the deepest hours of the night when the house is silent, if killing Dalton stopped anything at all, or if somewhere in his madness he passed the sickness to someone else. Because when I close my eyes, I still see the collars laid in that circle, and I still hear his voice whispering that 7 was practice and 8 would be perfection. I used to believe vacations were supposed to heal you. That's what Ryan always told me. We'll escape the noise, Anika. Just you and me. A lake, a kayak, a couple of beers, no deadlines, no alarms. He was my anchor, my laughter, the one who could calm the storm inside me with a single glance. And I believed him, until that trip, until I watched him die, and the water turned red before my eyes. We had been together for 3 years, and even in the middle of arguments or long silences, there was this invisible thread binding us. He knew I hated surprises but still planned one. A week away at a quiet lake in upstate New York, a rental cabin tucked between pines, a deck overlooking the still water, a single kayak left by the previous owner for guests who liked adventure. When we pulled into the gravel driveway that first evening, the sky was turning lavender, and Ryan squeezed my hand. "See? Perfect," he said, smiling like a kid showing off a secret hideout. The cabin smelled of cedar and dust. It wasn't fancy, just 2 rooms, an old wood stove, and windows that opened directly onto the lake, but it felt private, safe, ours. We unpacked groceries, opened a bottle of cheap wine, and talked about nothing until the stars bled across the sky. That night we lay on the porch, his chest under my cheek, whispering about vacations we'd never had, and places we'd someday see. The next morning, Ryan woke me with a grin. "We're going out on the lake today. Just us, the kayak, no one else." I was hesitant. I could swim, but water always unnerved me, the way it could hide anything beneath the surface. But his excitement was contagious. I told myself not to spoil the moment. We packed sandwiches, a flask of coffee, life jackets, and slid the kayak into the rippling glass of the lake. The air smelled of pine needles and wet earth. The paddle felt heavy in my hands, but Ryan, sitting behind me, kept laughing, calling me his captain. For the first half hour, it was almost magical. The sun glinted on the water. The only sounds were birds and our paddles dipping in rhythm. He teased me when I steered crooked. I pretended to be annoyed, though my heart was glowing with the simplicity of being with him. We paddled farther, past the cove where the reeds grew tall. That's when it happened. The kayak scraped against something hard. It wasn't a rock. I know that sound now, that dragging crunch. This was sharper, a tearing, screeching sound. And then Ryan screamed. It was so sudden, so raw, that it tore the world open. I twisted around and my heart dropped. A jagged piece of rusted metal, like part of an old sunken fence or machinery, jutted up from the lake bed. Ryan's thigh had been ripped open against it, torn wide. The water around him bloomed crimson instantly, like an ink stain spreading too fast to stop. "Anika," he gasped, his eyes wide, his voice broken with shock and pain. I froze. My mind went blank except for the sheer horror of the color. So much blood, swirling, clouding the water, dripping from his soaked shorts. He tried to lift himself, tried to grip the side of the kayak, but the wound gushed more with every movement. I scrambled toward him, nearly tipping us over. Oh my God, Ryan. My hands pressed down on his leg, but the gash was too deep, too jagged. The feel of it under my palms, hot, slippery, ungraspable, made bile rise in my throat. Don't let me go," he whispered, his face pale, lips trembling. I won't. I sobbed, but I could see it, the terror in his eyes, the realization flickering across his expression that this wound was mortal. The kayak wobbled, blood washing against my knees, my hands slipping with every press. I screamed for help, but the lake was empty. Our cabin was far on the other side, hidden by trees. My voice cracked against the silence, swallowed by the vast water. No one answered. Ryan tried to stay upright, clutching the edge of the kayak, but his strength was fading. I could feel it, the weakening grip, the slowing breaths. I kept pressing, kept begging him to hold on. "Stay with me. Please, Ryan, please." His blood soaked into my clothes, hot at first, then chilling against the breeze. His face turned gray, sweat dripping down his temple. He tried to smile at me, tried to whisper something, but his head rolled back, his body convulsed once. No, I screamed, shaking him, slapping his cheek, desperate for him to open his eyes. The kayak rocked violently, nearly flipping, but I didn't care. The lake, once serene, felt monstrous now, cradling us in its merciless grip. I screamed until my throat shredded. His chest barely moved, his eyes half open, glazed, blood everywhere. Time blurred, minutes or hours, I can't say. I just remember the sun burning my skin, the water sticky with iron, my hands trembling uncontrollably. I paddled with one arm, clutching his limp body with the other, dragging him back toward shore. My muscles screamed. My mind was a blur of terror, grief, and disbelief. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. When I finally staggered onto the shore, pulling his lifeless weight onto the dirt, I collapsed. I shook him, screamed into his face, tried CPR, though my sobs made me clumsy and weak. Nothing. His chest wouldn't rise. His lips stayed blue. The reality slammed into me like ice. Ryan was gone. I knelt beside him, soaked, shaking, covered in his blood, and the world shrank to silence. Only my ragged breathing, only the grotesque memory of the way his body twitched before it stopped. I pressed my forehead to his chest, praying for a heartbeat, any miracle, but all I felt was stillness. That night, I sat alone in the cabin with the lights off, his suitcase still half open by the bed. His laughter seemed to echo from the walls, the ghost of it making me sick. I replayed every second of the accident until I wanted to claw my own skin off. The scrape of the kayak, his scream, the way his blood looked against the blue water, the way his eyes begged me not to let go. I felt disgust, not at him, not even at the lake, but at myself, my useless hands, my weakness, my inability to stop death when it came. The authorities called it a tragic accident. Unlucky, they said, a hidden piece of debris. But to me, it was more than unlucky. It was cruel. It was as if the lake itself had decided to steal him from me, and I had been forced to watch, helpless. Weeks have passed, but I'm still there, kneeling on that shore, my hands sticky with his blood. I can't close my eyes without seeing it, The sound of water splashing makes me shiver. My reflection in the mirror is hollow, carved out by trauma and disgust. Ryan and I had planned our future in that cabin. Small dreams, simple dreams, a dog, maybe kids, trips around the world. Now all of that is gone, drowned in red water. All I have left are nightmares and the unbearable truth. I watched the man I loved die in my arms, and the world was merciless enough to let it happen. And no matter how much I scream, no matter how much I beg in the dark, the silence after his last breath will haunt me for the rest of my life. I came into Dorson because my car had overheated on a back road I never should have taken, and the place seemed the only pocket of civilization for miles. It wasn't even a town in the real sense, more like a scattering of houses along a single cracked road, pressed in by the Appalachian ridges that rose like walls. My phone had no service, and the gas station at the edge of town looked abandoned. A wooden sign leaning against the post read, "Closed until further notice," but the dust made me think further notice had come and gone years ago. I knocked on the door of the house nearest the station, thinking maybe someone would let me use a phone. The door opened just an inch, and a man's eyes peeked out. He was middle-aged, unshaven, his face weathered like bark. When I asked if he had a phone, he stared at me too long before saying, "No phones in Dorson." His voice was low and flat. Then he shut the door without another word. I should have turned back, walked to the highway and waited for another car to pass, but the road stretched for miles in either direction, and the heat pressed down like a hammer, so I kept walking deeper into Dorson. The houses all looked the same, wood gone gray with rot, curtains drawn tight, yards unkempt. Not a single child's toy, not a single dog barking. The silence was unnatural, like sound itself had been drained out of the hollow. I saw movement once, a woman across the street, standing on her porch, staring at me as I walked by. She didn't wave, didn't smile, just watched. Finally I found what passed for a diner, though it was little more than a low cinder block building with a rusting sign that read food. Inside the air was cooler, and a woman in an apron stood behind the counter. She looked normal enough, tired, but normal. I asked for water and explained my car trouble. She poured me a glass and set it down without meeting my eyes. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly. I asked her what she meant, but she just shook her head. "Eat your food and leave before dark." I hadn't asked for food, but when I looked down, there was a plate in front of me, a sandwich, already made, like she'd known I was coming. My stomach turned at the sight of it. When I pressed her for directions to the nearest mechanic, she finally looked up. Her eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with sleeplessness. "There's no help for you here," she whispered. "They won't let you leave after sundown." I tried to ask who they were, but she turned away, hands shaking as she pretended to wipe down the counter. That was when the door opened behind me, and a group of men came in. There were 3 of them, all tall, broad-shouldered, their clothes too clean compared to the rest of the town. One had a thick scar running from his jaw to his ear, another carried a length of chain wrapped around his wrist like jewelry, and the third just stared at me with a hollow, unblinking expression. They didn't order anything, didn't acknowledge the woman, just walked to a corner booth and sat down. The whole time their eyes never left me. I left the sandwich untouched, and walked out, pulse hammering in my throat. The sun was sliding lower behind the ridge, and shadows spilled long across the cracked road. I tried to head back the way I'd come, but when I reached the edge of town, the gas station I'd passed earlier was gone. Not boarded up, gone, as if the building had never been there. In its place stood a sagging fence and dense woods. My stomach dropped. I turned back. Every house had its curtains drawn now, every window dark. The street that had seemed so empty before was worse in shadow, like the whole place was holding its breath. I quickened my pace, scanning for my car. I couldn't even find the dirt road I'd driven in on. That was when I heard it, the low rattle of a chain dragging along pavement. I spun around. The man with the chain from the diner was standing at the far end of the street, the other 2 with him. Their faces were blank, almost calm, but they started walking toward me in unison, slow and steady. I bolted down an alley, my boots crunching gravel. The houses leaned closer here, their wooden frames groaning in the wind. I tried door after door, but every one was locked tight. When I glanced back, the men had turned into the alley behind me, their pace unchanged, as if they knew I had nowhere to run. Panic roared in my ears. I ducked into a narrow path between two buildings, stumbling through weeds and trash until the path spat me out into a clearing behind the diner. And that was when I saw it, a pit in the ground, wide and black, surrounded by wooden posts. From the posts hung chains, dozens of them swaying slightly though there was no breeze. The air smelled metallic, sharp. I crept closer and realized the dirt around the pit was stained dark, almost black. It wasn't old oil or rainwater. It was dried blood, layered over and over. My knees weakened. I staggered back, but a hand clamped down on my shoulder. It was the woman from the diner. Her apron was streaked with something I hadn't noticed before, brown stains, like dried mud or worse. Her face twisted with pity, not cruelty. "You should have left," she whispered. "Once you eat here, you're part of it. They don't let outsiders go." I tried to shake her off, but her grip was iron. From the shadows beyond the posts, more figures emerged. Townsfolk, men and women, young and old, all silent, all watching. Their eyes gleamed in the fading light, not with malice, but with resignation, like they'd accepted this long ago. The three men stepped into the clearing, forming a wall between me and escape. The one with the scar finally spoke. "Every few years, someone wanders in. The hollow takes what it's owed. We feed it, or it feeds on us." His voice was calm, almost bored, as though he were explaining a chore. I shouted at them, told them they were insane, told them people would come looking for me. The man just shook his head. "Nobody comes looking in Dorson, haven't in 50 years. Hands grabbed me from behind. Thin, wiry, stronger than they had any right to be. They dragged me toward the pit. I thrashed, kicked, screamed, but there were too many of them. Faces closed in from all sides, expressionless, like masks. The chains rattled as they were lifted, their cold weight settling across my arms and chest. I looked at the woman from the diner one last time, searching for mercy. She only mouthed 2 words, "I'm sorry." They shoved me to the edge, the pit yawning below, black and endless. The stench rising from it was suffocating, sweet and rotten at once. I realized then that the silence in Dorson wasn't silence at all. It was listening. The chains tightened. The scarred man leaned close, his breath hot against my ear. "The hollow keeps its own." Then they pushed. I fell, the world collapsing into darkness, the sound of chains clattering above me fading as the earth swallowed me whole. Nobody leaves Dorson.